Hi, thank you for joining me today. I hope that the people who are preparing for the Nahim lessons are busy spinning. And so, what I'm going to do, I'm on the last couple of rows on this lattice design area, and I will continue weaving those. I downloaded a new movie maker uh, application and I'm learning how to do it. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to, after I say welcome, I'm going to just go into weaving and, uh, and in this new application, I'm going to overlay me narrating some stories that I think you'd be interested in, if that makes sense. Anyway, okay, so I'll just keep weaving and like I say, narrate over what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm gonna read you those who were blown out to sea from Nassau, and that's from Swanton's Haida Text Masset dialect. One went from Bilgewater town to Kaangaway. He went to dry salmon. He was one of the West Coast Gittins. His name was Eagle. His wife belonged to the West Coast Reartown people. Her name was Whale Woman. And when they went over to Kungun, the wind blew from the north. They were almost saved. They were blown very near a reef line there. The reef is called Crab. They were driven seaward a whole month and a half. They had much water for in their canoe and a square box full of food. After the month and a half was expired, they came in sight of land, and next day they were blown to the land. There was a great crowd of people there. Their upper parts, perhaps coats, were red. Then they let them, Eagle and his wife, live there with themselves. Then they gave them a small house. They were very kind to them, and they, the strangers, had not thought that there was any land here. They asked them, "Is there land there beyond the ocean?" They continually gave food to them. "There is land there," said Eagle. And there was a cave there. This was full of birds. They told them to watch these. The lowest row around the inside was composed of wrens. Above them sat hummingbirds. Above these sat bees, and above these again sat wanuga. In this cave it was always warm, so the summer birds lived there. While they were there, 5 years passed. Meanwhile, their friends hunted around for them. They did not know where Eagle was. They hunted in vain where he used to go to dry salmon. His friends wept continually for him. At the end of 4 years, the Wanuga disappeared. They came across hither. 10 days afterwards, the hummingbirds also disappeared. 10 days after that, the bees were also gone. Many days after that, the wrens also disappeared. It was summer here, so they came over. They said to him, "Go back. Is your land where the sun comes up?" And he answered, "Yes." "Tomorrow go home," they said to him. Then they launched his canoe. Then they put water into it for the travelers. They also put food into it for them. Then they, Eagle and his wife, went straight towards sunrise. They went for 5 days. The land that they left disappeared. Then they did not see how they should go, because no land was in sight. Then a small gull flew around above them. After it had flown around for a while, it sat on the bow. After Eagle had gone along for a while, and the bow turned aside from the land, the gull flew away from them. Then they looked at it as it flew away, and it floated far off. Then they went straight towards it, and it got into their canoe again. And when they again went aside from the straight course to the land, it again flew straight towards the land, and it floated far off. And they went to it, and it again got into the canoe, and it again sat in their canoe for a long time. Then it sat a long time there, and when the canoe again pointed aside from their country, it again flew from them. It sat there a whole month. When this month was exhausted, another month opened its eyes. All that time the gulls sat in their canoe, flying away at times. When the last month came, it was a little foggy, but then it sat close by upon the water. All of the 10 days while it was foggy, it swam close by them. They were afraid they would lose it. After 10 days were past, the surface of the sea was clear. Then evening came upon them. At that time it sat about in their canoe during the night. When 10 days were past, the top of a mountain appeared a little, but then the seagull flew away from them. Then Eagle called to the killer whales. He called because he saw land. Then they saw the top of Hippa Island, and that time they poured their fresh water into the sea. He, the man, poured this water in for Ravenfin. Afterwards he also called for Noisy Fin. After he had spoken, something beneath him made a noise. Then they saw 2 killer whales swimming in the sea. He said to them, "Save me." They did not paddle. Then their dorsal fins came up on both sides of him. Then he said to his wife, "Go to the stern." So his wife did go to the stern, and he also went to the bow. Then he put his arm around the dorsal fin of one of them. He also seized the other. "Save me," he said. Then those killer whales started off. Ravenfin and Noisy Fin went. The Tian people, the killer whales, did it. When they got near the kelp, the killer whales sank away from them. An evening came upon them there, and they were blown to the west of Swamptown during the night, and they lighted a fire there. They had given them food in a copper box, and a canoe passed in front of them. These contained Ninstance people. They came to fight the Rear Town people. When the Ninstance people saw them, they went back. They landed alongside of them, and 5 men went over to see them. They had war spears, and they came behind them. And then they looked at them stealthily, and then the wife was not to be seen near the fire. She had been drying by the fire the copper box in which they got food, and which had become wet through. At that time the man was beating upon this with his hand. He made a drumming noise. Then some of them said, "Now." But when they did not see the wife, some said, "Wait until his wife comes." "No," they said, "go out and take him now." His wife was in the woods after water. During that time they came to take her husband. She saw them kill her husband, and that night she went up into the woods, and they cut her husband's head off, and they got into the canoe. Hiding themselves, they passed in front of Swamptown. Then the woman came to Swamptown, and she entered the chief's house. This chief was named He Who Became the Elder. He was one of the Cod people, a prominent Raven family on the northern end of Graham Island. He was a shaman. Then they asked her, "How is it that you were away so long?" "We were blown away. We were blown for a whole month and a half," she said. "Did you understand their language?" they said to her. "They were very kind to us. After we had been there a while, they let us go home." And they said to her, "What did they give you to eat?" They did not eat dried fish there. They ate all sorts of sweet things. Then she told them about the birds. And she also told them how they started away. "We were saved because a bird got into our canoe. When land came in sight, it flew away from us. After it had flown away, we poured water into the sea," she said. "Then something made a noise under us. Then we looked down into the sea, and we saw 2 killer whales going along beneath us. 'Save me,' said my husband. The dorsal fins of the killer whales came out at the bow, and then my husband put his arms around them. They brought us along. When they got near the kelp, they sank," she said. She also told them how her husband had been killed. They did not intend to kill him. They thought he was one of the Rear Town people. That was why they did it. The end. So that was a migration story. And it's so interesting that they say that the people were half red, and that Swanton made a note that he felt like it was what they were wearing that was red. And I think of all of those colorful Hawaiian capes that was a traditional garment in the Polynesian people, with their amazing, beautiful bird feather coats and headdresses. So that was a migration story, and I'd like to tell another migration story, and I especially like this one, and if you might guess why. Okay, so it's a Kagani story, or it was collected by an old Kagani, and the Kagani people are the ones that had moved up to Southeast Alaska in the southern British, or Prince of Wales Island. So an old Kagani of the Stostis family told the following story of this movement, of this migration. One of the Stostis lived at Yak. So that's a village that's up around Custa and Doddens, north of there. His wife was very fond of dried codfish. Once she still had some dried codfish on hand, but told her husband it was all gone. So he went out fishing. The woman's name was Sewa. She knew how to weave blankets of mountain goat wool. While her husband was out, the wind blew him out to sea, and he was drowned. So you could see that why I like this story, because it actually names a lady who was a mountain goat wool weaver. Okay, so he went out fishing. The woman, she knew how to weave blankets of mountain goat wool. While her husband was out, the wind blew him out to sea, and he was drowned. By and by, his friends who lived at Doddens came to Yak to see what property he had left. But when the woman brought forth her husband's box, only 2 pieces of wood dropped out. Then the friend of the man who was lost felt so much ashamed that he took the woman out, saying he was going to make a slave of her because she had caused the death of her husband. He brought her to Doddens. She belonged to the Masset Inland Born, and Swanton puts R22. He had a ranking, or number ranking for the various clans that he learned on Haida Gwaii. When they reached the beach, the woman's brother's son came down to see his aunt. And then the chief who had brought her over asked him if he came down to take his aunt away. He said yes. Then the chief seized him and took him up to the house, saying, "I will make a slave of you too." And the chief held this man, who was also one of the Stostis, by the neck. But just as they reached the house door, the latter turned around and drove a knife down through the chief's shoulder into his heart, so that he died on the spot. Then they arranged the corpse, as was customary, and set it up. The brother of the murdered man was out fishing, and all of the Stostis, ranging themselves on opposite sides ready to fight, awaited his return. But when he got home that evening, he told them that no death was to take place. He only wanted them to pay for his brother. Still, he himself was a great warrior. As soon as they heard that, they threw down all their armor and weapons. Then they began to pay him. And they paid him the biggest blood money that he was ever paid. Next day he went out and told them to separate for a time. And he told some to go over to Alaska. Part did so, and part went to Virago Sound. Those who went to Virago Sound were the up Masset Inlet town people. And he puts them as E19. taking their wives with them involved the immigration of our families as well. So they had asked, after this traumatic event, they had split up, the Stostis people. So that's I really like that story too, because they talk about the woman who knows how to weave the wool. So those are two stories of migration, and they only cover a little bit about the garments, but migration was a big part of our lives, and that journey of the couple that went somewhere out into the ocean and met people who were kind to them. I often think, because it is possible that they may have shared words with them. I know my mother and my grandmother, Nani Selena, when they went one time to Hawaii to demonstrate over there, my Nani Selena noticed so many words that were similar to Haida when she heard the Hawaiians speaking. And she mentioned that to my mom, and my mom, told us about that. And so it makes me think that if these Haidas had drifted across the ocean and met people, that these people took to them kindly. I mean, that's kind of unusual that they took them in and provided housing and food and were kind to them. It could have easily gone another way, but is it might be possible that these people in their greeting greeted the same? Was it possible that they touched noses? There's so many stories of us touching noses in our stories and myths, and I know that the Polynesian people do that even today. There's a respectful greeting that they do, and so it might be possible that way back then that custom caused these people to be these strangers to be kind to the Haida. So anyway, these are stories that I love. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that you will continue spinning your wool, and tomorrow I'll be at the end of this pattern, and we'll be able to start the Naheen area of the copper shields. So thank you for coming along with this little experiment as far as the narration and everything like that. So it's all an experiment. I'm hoping that I can get a handle on this this application so that I can produce a more finished way of doing these broadcasts. Thank you.